John also pointed to their housekeeper and her husband.
Linda Hoffman Pugh had been employed by the Ramseys for a while. She had asked Patsy to borrow $2,000 shortly before Christmas.
And although certain incriminating items were found in the housekeeper's home, such as nylon cord and duct tape, Linda Hoffman Pugh was cleared early on.
Police searched the housekeeper's home and found possible evidence linking the couple to John Bonet.
For example, the duct tape and the cord that was found.
But their alibis checked out, and DNA and handwriting didn't match.
Now, if the Ramseys were going to stay ahead of speculation, they were going to have to take things up a gear.
We don't want to draw the focus in tight yet. We've got to look at everything.
An FBI spokesman was quoted as saying, at this point, they don't regard it necessarily as a kidnapping.
That sounds like kidnapping to me.
Now, we are jumping a little bit ahead in the timeline. We're going from the 26th of December, the evening of the 26th of December, after Patterson went to interview the housekeeper. Now we're going to the 1st of January. And as I say, the Ramseys now need to take things up a gear if they're going to stay ahead of the speculation. And how do they do that? They go to Atlanta and they appear on CNN. Instead of speaking to the police, they speak to the media and they get their story out there. Now, I wonder whether this FBI spokesman that is being referred to by the reporter is Ron Walker. I mean, we know what his position was anyway. We know he didn't think it was a kidnapping just from an examination of the bogus ransom note. Do you remember what he said?
So the first thought is, it's not a kidnapping.
This is not the real thing.
This is not the real thing. And I remember turning to the Boulder police chief at the time, and I said, this is a murder. You're going to find a body.
Now, I want you to consider what we're dealing with here. We are basically at the 1st of January. And a CNN report is basically saying, well, an FBI spokesman has told us something. So how can you say that the FBI weren't involved when even the media know about the involvement and the thoughts of the FBI in the Ramsey case?
We were told the FBI was on its way and it would be a couple hours. And of course, they never came.
What's also interesting is John's response when Patsy says, it doesn't seem like a kidnapping to me. Let's play that again in slow motion. And can you see John looks like he's been punched in the gut? Even curiouser, in at least 2 transcripts, the original CNN transcript and a transcript published in the Daily Camera, Boulder's local paper, they both record Patsy as saying, it seemed like a kidnapping to me. Does that sound to you what Patsy said? Let's listen again.
An FBI spokesman was quoted as saying, at this point, they don't regard it necessarily as a kidnapping.
That sounds like kidnapping to me.
You've got to wonder, what happened? Was this a true attempt to
I don't know.
get ransom?
It makes no sense.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. So you can see what happened early on. The investigation into the housekeeper fizzled quite quickly. And then the police attention started to focus on the Ramseys, and as well as the sentiment overall in Boulder started to accumulate in suspicion against the Ramseys. So an interesting question that arises is, if the Ramseys meant to speak to the press instead of the police, why not to speak to the media rather than speak to the police? Why not just do so in Boulder? Well, remember, Boulder is a small little city in Colorado. What if the Ramseys could leapfrog the local media blizzard by going to a big network somewhere else that was less au fait with the details? One of those details being, remember, at the time, in the very, very early days, they were saying that there were no footprints in the snow. Now, I don't think they would have said that in Boulder if everybody knew that it didn't snow. And so I think they wanted to leapfrog that whole media blizzard by going to a bigger network that was going to trump the narrative that was starting to sort of germinate in Boulder. Well, I don't know if that was the plan, but if that was the plan...
Not a great plan.
But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, we are going to be resuming the Peripheral Figures series. This is just a temporary leap forward, just a week in time to look at what the Ramseys did in this period of time when the police were trying to talk to them. And it really is fascinating, even astonishing, to see just how rabid, just to see how much media interest there was looking at this vintage material. Remember, this was the time of television networks and TV in those early days. Meanwhile, if you're finding this analysis worthwhile, interesting, useful, well-researched, please do hit the thanks button, and let's get started.
CNN's Brian Cabell is in Boulder, Colorado, following the story, and he joins us with the latest. Brian?
Lyndon started out as a simple but tragic murder of a child beauty queen. But then questions arose, curiosity arose, and suddenly the media descended on Boulder. We are told now that as many as 300 media representatives may be here right now.
That is CNN's Brian Cabell, the person who actually interviewed the Ramseys on January the 1st. And let me repeat the question. If the plan was to kind of get ahead of the narrative by going on to CNN in Atlanta, if that was the plan, did it work? Was it a good plan? Because just a week later, by around January 8th, January 9th, 300, you heard him say it there, 300 media representatives were in Boulder just covering the Ramsey case. But what are we really talking about here? Well, we're talking about Cabell was the reporter who interviewed the Ramseys a week earlier in Atlanta. They came to him. It's quite ironic. The Ramseys leave Boulder to give an interview with Cabell, as I say, who was in Atlanta. Now, days later, Cabell has left Atlanta to travel to Boulder to get interviews, to get information, to discuss the Ramsey case. So, again, the question arises, why didn't they just give their first interview in Boulder? If the idea was to talk to the press, why not simply do it in Boulder? Why do it in Atlanta?
Judith Phillips was a friend of the Ramseys.
Atlanta, you didn't leave the house without makeup, even if you were going to work out. But Boulder wasn't that way at all. It was just the opposite.
A college town surrounded by the Rocky Mountains.
The Ramseys were kind of an anomaly in town in some ways because they were from the South.
And so one almost has this impression is that they wanted to get their kind of people on their side early on. Now, one interesting issue that flows out of this is that the Ramseys may have felt that Boulder was enemy territory right from the get-go. You know, that the liberal folks there frowned on things like beauty pageants, and perhaps they thought they might get a more positive press outside of Boulder. If that's the case, it's an interesting thing to be thinking about, public perception, press. What do people think of us? When you'd imagine another thing you could have been thinking about is, shouldn't the priority really have been to be finding JonBenét's killer and talking to the cops, not the media? Like, we want to know who killed JonBenet. And I think here it's quite interesting to say, well, obviously they were starting to feel the threat. They were starting to feel intimidated by the police presence and what the police were thinking. That might be true on the one side, but on the other side, what if they had some idea of who may have committed this crime, and so finding JonBenét's killer wasn't the immediate priority. The priority was making sure that they were going to be okay. I'm just saying, consider that idea. I don't know what the reality is here. Was that the actual thought process going on behind the scenes? And again, did it work? Was it effective? And then consider this. By talking to the media the way they did and where they did, they also created a media shitstorm. I mean, there was already one in Boulder. Now they've created a one that's sort of going nationwide. And if you think about it, it's the likes of which we've almost never seen. Only the Madeleine McCann case came close. Suppose you could say O.J. Simpson did as well. But, it's a similar scenario where the McCanns gave press conferences, regular press conferences, often daily, even though they were asked not to talk to the media. Instead, that case became one of the most mass-reported cases in history. Do you think that happened by accident? Do you think that happened because the McCanns didn't want the media involved? And do you think what happened with the Ramseys happened because the Ramsey's didn't want the media involved. Well, they certainly wanted the media on their side. And look at where we are today. Wouldn't you say that the mainstream media as a whole are on the Ramsey side today? I mean, open question, what do you think CNN thinks of the Ramseys today when they interview them? And so I think it's an interesting question. In the end, did the media coverage impact, pressure, distort in some way the respective police investigations? Did the media coverage impact this case overall? And if so, how? Well, in both of those cases, John Bonet and Madeleine McCann, think about it, the lead detectives resigned. And not because they weren't passionate or invested in the case. Also, both lead detectives suspected family involvement in the incidents involving both daughters.
Friday, December 27th, the investigation of Boulder's first and only homicide of the year intensifies.
I can tell you at this point, there is no information that lead us towards any suspect or identifiable suspect at this time.
That was December 27th, and that was basically the position in front of the cameras from the head of the police in Boulder. That was what he was saying to the media. Let's go to Saturday, December 28th.
Saturday, December 28th, the Ramsey family heads to the police station to answer questions and give hair, blood, and handwriting samples.
Well, Patsy and I, Burke, our son, is 9.
And this is John answering a question about who went to give samples of handwriting, hair, DNA, etc. on that particular day, December 28th. And you know, if you think about it, the Boulder police found themselves between a rock and a hard place. They were unable to say who committed the crime, but also unwilling to commit to saying what they thought either, despite mounting pressure.
Still no suspects.
We have never contended that anyone is or is not a suspect. We have not ruled anybody in, nor have we ruled anybody out.
Of course, around this time, they would also make this announcement that the streets of Boulder are safe. There's not a killer on the loose. So with a lot of what was going on here, like the ransom note, you sort of had to read between the lines. But I think the important thing and the interesting thing is you can tell at this early stage that they are always playing their cards and choosing their words very carefully. I think both sides of the equation were doing that.
It would appear to the average person that they have some reason to protect somebody. When will you decide that enough is enough, and would you consider the grand jury?
Mike, I think you're being a little harsh. Have you ever lost a child?
She was wearing the same outfit she was wearing the night before.
With me right now, Peter Boyles. He's a radio talk show host at KHOW in Denver. I've been listening to him for the last couple of days. What you said repeatedly, Peter, is that this doesn't add up.
It doesn't
what,
add,
what does that mean exactly?
There's too many holes in it.
And of course, Peter Boyles would go on to interview another housekeeper, Linda Wilcox, and what she observed and what she said also led to additional questions and concerns.
They never really reacted like parents. If it was my daughter that had been killed, I'd be sitting at the police department every day.
Miss Ramsey, you found the note. It was a handwritten note, 3 pages.
The note was lying across the 3 pages across the run of one of the stair treads. And it was kind of dimly lit. It was just very early in the morning.
It was early, it was almost dark. Why didn't Patsy turn on a light to read the ransom note? Why didn't they turn on a light when they went into Burke's room? And there's another really fascinating thing that Patsy says here. She says, I was the first one down. She adds that detail.
I was on my way to the kitchen to make some coffee. And we have a back staircase from the bedroom areas. And I always come down that staircase. And I'm usually the first one down.
Now, if you think of that detail, isn't that basically communicating this idea that, well, this is what she did every day? Who would know that? Well, the housekeeper. And so I do want to come back to this transcript of the interview and deal with it in more detail, do some statement analysis, probably as a part 2 to this episode.
Is it a question of wealth? Some people have said these people are wealthy.
Well, I would ask you this question. If this were in a working-class blue-collar neighborhood or minority neighborhood, any city in the United States of America, and a dead child was found trussed up in the basement, do you think that that family would be handled like this family is being handled?
Or do you think fair comment, or do the Ramseys have a point when they say, we just didn't trust the police?
We just didn't trust the police for good reason. They put out volumes of misinformation and false information to bring pressure on us.
That may be true, but you can imagine the police thinking or feeling the same thing from the opposite side of the table, that Ramsey were also putting pressure on them, for example, by going onto CNN. So I don't know what the point was of the Ramseys going on CNN, but if the point was to get America on their side, if the point was to put a particular narrative out there, did it succeed? Based on where we are today, did it succeed? Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.